You know, I can't give a sermon without my love shoes on. They are comfortable. Because friends gave them to me, as you all know, because my message always seems to be the same thing, love. But today we're going to talk about something a little bit different. Jesus has a way, as Bishop Chilton mentioned last week, of giving us these really difficult parables sometimes. And I don't know about you, but those were always the ones where I said, I'm not going to pay attention to them. But then Ann gave me the sermon. And I had to pay attention to it. And at first blush, this sermon looks like something like, well, the wealthy get wealthier, and it's all about capitalism, right? You invest it, you get more, and Jesus would be happy about that. Wait a minute, Jesus would be happy about that? What about those Beatitudes where the meek shall inherit the earth and the poor, pay attention to the poor, and the poor will be first, and all of those things about the poor and how they are, that I am in the least of us. So, does Jesus really mean to be talking about capitalism here? I don't think so. And I'd like you to take your bulletins out, and what I'd like to do is go through it line by line, because not slowly. But I'd like to if you would look at the gospel with me. Because there's some really interesting things in here about the message that Jesus is trying to give. First of all, this takes place when Jesus is trying over and over and over again to explain to those poor disciples who never seem to get it what is going to happen and how he expects people to behave. He keeps telling them, I'm going to be crucified, I'm going to be buried, I will come again, and then I will leave you. And they don't want to believe any of that. They don't want to believe the crucifixion, much less he's going to leave them. And then when he says he's going to come back, this is one of those parables where he is trying once again to reach us, reach the disciples, reach us for the later readers, and to tell us in dramatic terms what he expects of us. When Jesus wants to make a point, he doesn't do it subtly. I mean, remember when he went into the temple and threw out all the money changers and all of that? He doesn't walk in and meekly say, oh, you know, I think you shouldn't be here. And so he is trying to make a very strong point here. And let's look at what he says. First of all, he starts with an extraordinary proposition. That the owner, the master, is going away and he's going to leave his entire property for safekeeping with 3 slaves. That in and of itself is a really amazing proposition. But then, look what he gave the servants, the slaves. He gave the first one 5 talents. A talent in those days, some people said it was 15 years worth of salary. Some people say it was 20 years worth of salary. I don't care if it's 15 or 20, that's a lot of money. So he's giving these slaves, the first one, 5 times 15 years salary. 75 times of salary. And he's giving it to him to entrust to him. The second one he gives 2 talents, and the third one he gives 1. So do you see it? So the one who had 5 talents goes off and makes 5 more. The one who had 2 goes off and makes 2 more. But the one who had 1, what does he do with it? Why does he bury it?
Wants to protect it.
Because what?
Wants to protect it.
Yeah?
He's afraid.
He was afraid. And protect it. He's afraid, so he wants to protect it. Right? He's thinking, whoa, I don't want to get in trouble with my master. I'm going to do the safe thing. I'm not going to take any risks. I'm going to do what is safe. I'm going to bury it in the ground. So he thinks, oh, I'll be really, that master's going to be happy with me because I'm burying this in the ground. But what happens when the master comes back? The master says to the first 2 servants, or slaves, you've done great things. You've brought in more money. I'm going to reward you. We've come into joy of my kingdom. The slave who was 1 and brings back just 1 what does the master do? Kicks him out of the kingdom. Why does he kick him out? Well, you just said a very important thing. Did you all hear what he said?
No.
He was disobedient. And that's true. He exactly was disobedient. The master wanted them to make more, to do what he's asked them to do, and the first two did that, didn't they? And the last one was afraid. Why was he afraid? Because he was afraid that he would be punished, and so he did the safe thing by burying it.
And he would lose the money.
And he would lose the money, right. What if he invested it and didn't get any, and then you have nothing to show its master? So he was afraid to take a risk. So the master at the end says, "You wicked and lazy slave. You knew, did you, that I reap where I did not sow and gather where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was my own with interest." So then they took the talent from him and thrust him off into the darkness. But then he says this very troubling thing, where for all those who have been given, more will be given, and to all those, and they will have an abundance, but from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. Now, given the context of everything that Jesus has said in the New Testament and how he quotes Leviticus about taking care of the poor, he can't really mean that we're going to want that 1% to get more, do we? I mean, it just would be totally illogical with everything else Jesus said in the Bible. I mean, Jesus said in his preachings and how he quoted Leviticus in the Old Testament. So what is Jesus saying here? I think what he's saying is, I have come to you and you know me. I have given you my love in abundance. I have given it to you. You are a follower of me. And I want you to take that love and not bury it in the ground, not hide it under a bushel. Remember that song, This Little Light of Mine? He doesn't want you to hide it under a bushel. He wants you to share it with the world. He wants you to take it out and risk. Even you might risk losing that one talent. You might, but he wants you to try. He wants each one of us to try. And there's a very interesting thing in this parable. Do you notice, how did he allocate the talents?
According to the
That's right. To his ability. So he gives each one of us what we can do with his love. In other words, I thank goodness won't be measured against Anne. You know, I will have what I'm able to do and go out and do what I can. The point is not that we each have to be the same. The point is we are given it according to our abilities. God knows who we are. God loves us regardless of our warts and everything. And it's an amazing love. But part of being a Christian is not just taking it and hiding it in the ground. Part of being a Christian is taking it out and sharing it with love and his love and with abundance and glory. And I think that's what Jesus is trying to say in these most extreme terms. He wants every one of us to do what we can. So what does that mean? What does that mean? Well, it's a shame in a way that we don't have the passage immediately following this verse. I'd like to read it to you because Jesus says in no uncertain terms what he means. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory, and all the nations will be gathered before him. And he will separate people from one another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at the left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, "Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. Sounds like loaves and fishes, doesn't it? I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. Sounds like our clothing pantry, doesn't it? I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, what was it if we saw you? When was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in a prison or visited you? And the king will answer them, truly, I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. This is what Jesus wants us to do, and then it's a shame that that doesn't follow, isn't part of our reading today. Because Jesus makes it crystal clear. He doesn't hedge around. He tells us over and over and over again that we are all of God's children. We all deserve equal dignity and respect, and we are to respect that dignity. But sometimes we get afraid like the servant does, don't we? We might be at a party and somebody might say a racist joke. Do we say something? Do we tell them we don't approve? Or do we take the safe route and bury our talent and say, I'm too afraid to get them upset, I'm not going to say anything? Or we see sexism happening. When I first started working at the Office of Chief Counsel, Internal Revenue Service, sexism was rampant. I mean, things that male managers did was just really awful. And no one said anything. And I was looking at this and thinking, what is going on here? And they didn't want to make trouble. They just wanted to be off in their own little worlds, burying their talents. But that's exactly the opposite of what Jesus wants us to do. He wants us to dare, to risk, to do something, to take action, each according to our abilities. Each according to our abilities. So my action might be different from your action, or your action, or your action. What we might do is all different, but at least we're trying. At least we're trying, and that's what God asks us to do, to try. The other thing that's very interesting in this parable, to me, is the whole idea of forgiveness and accountability. I think that we sometimes get confused our obligation to forgive others with accountability for behavior. And that, remember, what has God asked us to do? He's asked us to do, Jesus has asked us to do two things. Anybody remember? Love the Lord and
Your neighbor
as yourself. That's it. He doesn't ask anything else of us, but he asks us to actively do that. But what about those people we know and support who don't do that? What about people, are we afraid, like the servant burying his talent, not to do anything about those people? Do our actions reflect that we are Christians? That we take those talents and go into the world to spread God's love in abundance? Do we act according to what we think? Do we support corporations that perhaps to strip lands or cause water to be polluted so that people in Flint, Michigan are drinking polluted water and their children are dying? Adults are getting cancer and children are getting cancer. Do we support those corporations? Do we support politicians who lie repeatedly, who brag about assaulting women? You know, we can disagree on issues, but there are some things Jesus would never approve of. And I heard this phrase, and I haven't used it before, but sometimes I do think we need to ask, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus want us to do? Jesus would not want us to bury our talent and say, well, oh, I don't want to confront that, or the favorite line is, well, everyone does it. Everyone does it, so why, what's the difference? But the difference is that if we start confronting this everyone who does it, maybe the world will be a different place. Maybe we can change the world bit by bit in our own ways, in what we see and do, because being a Christian is just not coming here on Sunday morning. I mean, it's wonderful to see everyone, but it's equally as important what we do out in that community. Do we condone racism? Do we condone sexism? Do we vote for people who are openly and brazenly sexist? And is that what Jesus would want us to do in our actions? Our actions are not just whether or not we help an old person across the street. That's fine. I'm not saying don't help an old person across the street. But it's more than that. Our actions, it's the ripple of all of our actions in the world. How will people know that we're Christians? How are they going to know if we don't behave like it in everything we do? So, remember that song, This Little Light of Mine? Yeah. Jesus wants us to take it out into the world and show everyone by our actions, not just what we think or say, that we are Christians. And welcome to God's world of abundant love for all of us. So I'm going to ask you all to join me to sing the song, This Little Light of Mine. Okay. You don't remember the tune? Yes.